I think you can use AI in a negative way just as much as you can in a positive way, right? So if you wanted to, yeah, I mean, I could just tell AI to completely hallucinate my entire design. And I could say, hey, base a design on Frank Gehry, and I want it to look like Frank Gehry's architecture, or I want it to look like BWBR's architecture. Whatever it is, you can do those things, and then it's not your thought anymore, and you're going to end up with just AI stuff, right? AI garbage is kind
AI
of what.
slop, AI slop,
Yeah,
right?
it is,
Um,
and I think that's just an interesting way to approach it. You can do it that way, or you can do it where you're again using your own design methodology and your way of approaching work, and it's just a partner in that process. And I think that's where it's powerful for our teams, and that's where you start seeing the positive side of it too,
yeah.
as you go down that road.
Okay, Andrew, welcome to the Run Diffusion podcast, man. Excited to have you on as our first guest. It's been pretty fun getting to know you, and it's been super helpful talking to you. Quick little disclosure: he is an enterprise customer with us, and but we want to get into a bunch of different topics today that we're really hoping to just kind of dive in and try to understand how you are adopting AI and what's useful, what's not, what are the lessons learned, and that type of thing. But I mean, first off, I'd obviously love to kind of get to know how you got into architecture, because I don't think that, being a design technology lead is something that most people getting into architecture even know you can eventually get into. So that's really interesting. That's where you landed.
Yeah, no, well, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's an interesting story, I think. And to your point, it's still not technically a traditional career path. We talk about this a lot, which is kind of interesting. I meet with a group of colleagues that from other architecture firms, and it's all the same thing, right? We don't have a traditional career path to this point. So for me, it just started, back in school. So I went to University of Kansas and got a master's degree in architecture from there. And so that was my pursuit in school was architecture. But kind of along the way, I just naturally, I think, had a knack for technology. So like even back in school, I was the person that learned pretty much every tool we had available to us. I ended up teaching it to probably my entire class and end up being a tutor in the school for different tools, right? So everything from, back then, like AutoCAD, the 3ds Max to, I remember we didn't have Rhino at the school, and I actually found it and said, hey, we need to use this, and taught it to my whole class. So, it started there like that. I think the passion of, what tools we had and how we were able to take the built environment and visualize it and be able to really show our designs and thoughts early on. That's just, I think, how I naturally gravitated to it, right? And that just led into the career that way too. So again, started off in typical architectural fashion like everyone else does, but that quickly turned into like I was the Revit guy, and then I was the BIM guy, and the BIM lead, the BIM manager, and now today I sit in, this key manager of design technology. So it's encompassing kind of everything that plays into the role of architecture. So yeah.
Yeah, and so you said that you kind of started off teaching everybody in school, and from what I've seen, you also kind of have been teaching a class every year.
Yeah. So yeah, I got involved with kind of local colleges because I again was kind of passionate about teaching. So I wanted to see if I could do that in more of a official position, right? So I've worked at a couple places. I've been primarily at Southwestern Illinois College here locally near where I am, and I teach actually in construction management classes. So that's been like an area here that's has a lot of technology embedded into it, and just by adjacency to architecture, I've kind of know a lot about the technology that's involved in the construction process too, and kind of how they overlap, right? There's a lot of overlap between what we do in design and kind of what happens over construction. So it's a class I've taught for a while there, and it's kind of evolved a bit. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun to talk with emerging professionals and young people about what technology is doing for us in those ways. So yeah, I've been there for a
So
while. I think I've been
how has
doing
that evolved over the last couple of
the
years
well, I
as you
mean, it's
revisit that class?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously AI was a topic I didn't talk about when I first started, right? So that's come a
Yeah,
long way. So, some of it's been fairly constant. It's just the technology gets better. I mean, I've always talked about, the building information modeling is always a hot topic. I've said, this is invading construction. Construction's, taking us over a whole lot. We talked about drone usage. We've talked about reality capture. All those things have been around for a long time, right? It's now, like AI is coming in and changing the game for everybody, and that includes contractors as well. But yeah,
right. Well, I'm super curious because you gave a talk about the pilot that you've kind of been doing. You've kind of created and structured a pilot program because that's definitely something we've seen with a lot of people. Is I mean, not just with what we're doing, but like in general, everyone across the board with AI is trying to figure out how to adopt AI in a way that they can definitively say it's helping and not just merely adopting for the sake of not like FOMO. It's like, are we adopting this for FOMO's sake? Or are we adopting this because it's actually making real impact? It's actually saving time. And so, anyways, I'm super intrigued with how structured you've been about approaching the adoption.
we've tried to be. I'm not going to say it's a perfect system, but and this is really even before AI was on the scene, right? So even you just rewind a little bit before we dealt with AI, it was still this issue of, hey, we need a tool or we'd like to look at a tool that does something for us or improves the workflow, right? And even before AI, you had, well, there might be, a handful of tools that do that, or someone's over here telling you this can do it, and someone over here is telling you this can do it. Or, hey, maybe we just build something ourselves in a sense that does it the way we want to. So that's been an age-old problem in the world of just any technology in a sense, but definitely in design technology, right? So the thought there was let's create a way to evaluate tools before we invest in them too, right? So I don't want to just go out and buy licenses for everything. I'd rather let's sit down with a small group of people that understand the problem we're trying to solve and they want to dig into this tool and find out what it does for us. And so yeah, we established a pilot program that allows us to explore different possibilities and different tools in kind of a safer space. It's something that is going to be temporary for that period of time, but then we use that evaluation process with users to find out where the holes are, what's working, what's not working, and then whether we should really make the decision to adopt something. So we try to use that as an avenue to say, all right, this really worked, and we want to go with it. We want to now budget for that and have a plan to actually adopt that tool. Um, or it's the opposite, and we say, this really didn't give us what we wanted. Here's some other alternatives that we see that we could possibly look into, or maybe we want to revisit this in another year or two when the tools made some more improvements, right? So it's a safe way for us to do it without fully investing in something. And AI has just kind of thrown gasoline on that fire, right? So now instead of 5 things, it's like 20 different tools that could potentially do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And like, obviously you guys are using us, but like I'm very curious, what else out there have you guys been finding? Like just across uh the domain of all the different areas where technology can assist in the processes and documentation, planning, which pieces have kind of really started to, I don't know, have some useful tools and which ones less so, would you say?
Yeah, it's, with AI specifically, um, there's a lot of buzz, a lot of hype around things. The two big focuses we had, and we did two pilots last year that kind of broke it apart. Like to us, there was two areas of AI that made sense. One was the visualization side, right? So one of the reasons we looked at Run Diffusion, like we knew there's an avenue with the visualization, whether it be creating images or editing images or just in that vein of work. There was a certain avenue for that. The other one was basically data or chat based. So how can that world of AI help in our day-to-day process? And really we were kind of evaluating two things. One was a visualization platform, and the other was how do we adopt kind of a general chat platform across the board for the company just to see how we can benefit from that. And again, ran Run Diffusion through the rigor of that pilot. And one of the reasons we came to that decision to look at Run Diffusion in the first place, honestly, is because at that time I had been looking, and a number of people had been looking at a number of different AI generation tools, right? And they were all fluctuating. Like, oh, this one did great. There's Nano Banana. There's this one over here in ChatGPT. Like, there's a lot of options, and with how rapidly things were happening, we didn't want to be kind of left behind or go with one solution and basically say, oh, this is it. We can't
It
pivot.
moves fast.
Yeah, exactly. So it was attractive to me when I was looking at things to say, you know what, Run Diffusion's got everything underneath one umbrella, and even though we might not use everything in in the platform, it still gives us access to that whenever it becomes available, and it's something we can test, right? So that helped us, move in that direction.
You can kind of
So
stay
yeah,
plugged into the current of never-ending innovations
yeah,
that keep disrupting, yeah.
yeah. And every time I get in there, I feel like there's always new stuff. I mean, it was even funny in the pilot effort that we did. As we got to the end of it, there's a short time period. I think we had it for, I don't know, maybe not even 3 months. But I had people in there for probably a good, month and a half, 2 months, actually actively doing things. And right at the end of the pilot, when we were trying to decide what to do or where to go, like Nano Banana Pro came out, right? So before it was like Nano Banana, and then Nano Banana Pro came out, and it was funny because it solved a lot of the issues we were dealing with even in the pilot. And I immediately went back to the group and I said, hey, just FYI, I know we just finished this, but this brand new version, came out. Try it quickly if you can on things, and it like it answered a lot of our questions that we had even before that. So the rate of change is kind of nuts these days with what's happening. So it's and that's a kind of a motto I think I've said internally. Even I said we have to be a little more comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it doesn't mean that I'm going to sign up for something now and then we're going to say, oh, that's what we're going to use the next 5 years. We don't know what that's going to look like.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, as you were kinda going through that pilot process, like, who have you found to kind of be some of the best AI adopters? Is it the younger 25-year-olds? Is it someone you didn't expect? Like, what have you kinda found?
I would say it's a pretty big mix across the board. You've got people that are just naturally, I think, curious about it, right? So they're wanting to understand their process better and see what else they can get for it. And again, I've had some people get into this and do some really incredible stuff that I was like, wow, that's I didn't even think about that. It's a really cool way of approaching it. So yeah, it's kind of across the board. You get, we just had a conversation recently where, you hear some of the younger people, even coming out of school, like they're sometimes a little more adverse to it, right? Like this idea of AI. And I think it's a
Mm,
narrative playing out differently
yeah.
though,
Oh,
um,
yeah.
in that space. There's a difference in, you know, people like me that we've been in the industry for a while, had some experience, and now we're seeing, how AI can benefit and be that partner in it. I think the narrative that's playing out sometimes in school is that it's a very negative thing that comes in,
Yeah.
and
That it's, like, replacing rather than augmenting.
yeah, right, right. And I think that's the narrative that's playing out. So a lot of times naturally, I think younger students and people coming into it just don't even want to approach it in a sense in those terms. But yeah, I've seen everyone that we've worked in our company that's kind of from the younger side to the even the folks that are maybe even near retirement still, getting really curious about it and wanting to learn more. So it's been kind of fun to see that.
Yeah. So now that you guys have kind of, like, adopted also, like, some of the chat-based stuff, has that have you guys found any breakout use cases with that yet, or is that still you're still trying to kind of penetrate, like, the deeper workflows there, and you're still just kind of experimenting on that side?
It's a lot of, I think, experimenting at this point. I think there's a lot of like low hanging fruit when it comes to just the general chat world and how it interfaces with some of our typical tools. But where it's going to get interesting is more, you know, I think when we can connect it to some of the more powerful tool sets. So I mean, connecting that to Revit and seeing what we're actually able to do there and how all that intertwines. I mean, using AI or whichever agent you're using, like in your Excel workflows or your word workflows. That's like there's some obvious wins there and some very great uses for it. I mean, it speeds up the process for a whole lot of things. But yeah, it's I think the thing to understand is how interconnected this all can be, right? That it can really connect in deeper ways, and it's not just a little add-on anymore. It's like well, it's an add-on here, but it can connect to this and it can connect to that, and it can help pull a whole lot of things together for us in the future. So
Yeah, and I think it's really kind of challenged everyone to have to just rethink ways of working, especially now that everything's moving into kind of an agent first. And we've got some stuff coming around agent first. I don't even think we've shown you yet, um, but yeah, in terms of like approaching things from an agent first, I noticed you mentioned something on LinkedIn about it. How have you had to evolve your thinking around being able to collaborate and work with agents in a way?
yeah, I think it's still the whole agentic thing. It is still a learning experience for a lot of people. It's still a bit of learning experience for me, and I think some people think they even know what an agent is and what it does, but a
Yeah,
lot of times I like someone will say that's agentic. I'm like, nah, it's not really probably what you're thinking when you think agentic, right? So,
yeah,
um, that one I think is just a really evolving topic and how we're going to implement that. But yeah, to your point, I feel like it's going to change the ways we've probably approached things. And this is a conversation we have had recently to where it's not just about applying AI to kind of our traditional workflows. Like
mm,
AI is going to it's a tool that you have to start sometimes rethinking the way you do some of the work you do, right? It's not necessarily, oh, I just need to turn AI on for my QA/QC process, or I just need to turn it on for my Revit process. Now it's sometimes it's really kind of reworking that, and what does it mean to have this kind of potentially agentic tool, right? I'm not going to call it a person. not gonna,
yeah,
not gonna, I think when you get away from the calling it like this thing, but yeah, having this agentic tool, right, that can basically automate and do these processes while I'm asleep, is very, very interesting. But yeah, I think it's gonna rewrite some of the traditional workflows we've had in the past.
yeah. I think they're a little too sycophantic to be be humans.
Yeah,
They'll tell you that is the greatest idea known to mankind every time. It will always reaffirm. You really have to fight against it's it really wants to please you, and it really wants
it,
to
yeah,
tell
yeah.
you you're correct. And so
It does like to do that. Yeah,
and you have to
sometimes it
figure
gets.
out or go ahead.
No, it's funny though. It's also like I've had those conversations with it where I'm like I feel like I am talking to it. And I remember I was working on an automation, and it knew I was getting frustrated without me being frustrated. Like, because it got to the point where I was working on automation with like Dynamo or something. And I was asking it to get through this part and it kept failing. It wasn't working. And then I got to the point where I was just basically sending screenshots like, this is an error. Like, and it all of a sudden it changed its tone. Like, I understand it's frustrating, but hang in there. Like, the thing you got to remember is AI doesn't get tired
Yeah.
and it doesn't really get frustrated. We as humans get tired and frustrated, and it might mean that I move on or go get a coffee and come back. Yeah, it's still there. It's still ready to help and move things forward. And it's not a human. We have to understand that, I think, and work with it that way. But I do believe I asked it one time, did we just become best friends because it solved the problem? I was like, I think we're becoming best friends. And it said, yes, of course we are. Yeah, that's it's interesting, but yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, and so it's almost like the more you get into it, it starts to become like a new operating system. It's like it's a completely separate layer, like above all of your work. And and with the visual stuff, like you have to find new ways of doing your workflow where you had to do so many things far more manually. And now it's like, oh, okay, I can plan ahead and divert a bunch of the work here to this agent, here to this platform. and then you have to create completely new workflows. How how has your team addressed that, and how often do you have to kind of come in and, as the design technology lead, like, really lead and teach people, like, the higher level way of understanding how to approach this? Like, are people starting to pick that up on their own, or are you having to really kinda help retrain people's fundamental understanding of how to approach it?
I think when it comes to training, some of the best ways to get people to train, or when it's working, is when I don't have to really interject much. You know what I mean? Like, if I'm having to basically, like, walk people through a process, it's like, it's either there's a problem with the tool or the workflow is just kind of broken. But when you can start seeing people really take it and run with it, and they're getting success, and you can actually see how they're learning how to get to that point, that's where I find this pretty interesting. And honestly, Run Diffusion's helped with that, because we have insights into what's being done, what's going on. As an admin, like, I can go in there and I can look at everything that's being generated, which, by the way, is part of our training and onboarding, to let people know nothing's private. So please use it for what it's meant to be used for. But the whole point is, it's really interesting to me to be able to go in and watch. I can literally see someone's process, and how they started with a base image, and then they generated a couple times, and now their prompt's been expanded, and they've tried these things. So it really gives you this great kind of insight into how it's being used. And that does help us in conversations to say, hey, by the way, we don't need to run 4K generations all the time. Like, that's just something. I've gone back to the team and said, hey, I know it's an option and it sounds great, but we don't need to run 4K all the time. That's only for specific purposes. Or, hey, I noticed, that this prompt was, you tried to do this. What else could we do? Or what other tool in there could we actually use for it? So having that insight is valuable too. And that's just a knowledge sharing factor. But no, it's not necessarily been where we've had to tell people to especially on the visualization side. I think on the visualization side, it was a little bit more natural, I think, for people to engage with that one, right? Because this is a process we've done for a long time. Like, people will say, oh, architecture is just making pretty pictures. You'll hear that comment from a lot of people. And yes, we like to get to the pretty pictures, but there's a lot of thought, there's a lot of intent, there's a lot of work that's behind that.
Yeah.
What this has allowed us to do is take our creativity to kind of 10x it, right? So the amount of time it used to take to put together a polished image to be able to really sell an idea to a client or really express that, it's just made that to where we're able to do that with a lot less complication to it, right? It's a lot easier for us to get to that point. And yeah, I don't know if it's definitely changed a little bit of the workflow, but it's just that one is a more natural tool, I think, that we just kind of added on to the process, which has been nice.
So this visualization has, yeah, been one of the easiest ways to get into AI is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I would say that for us, because it was a natural. I think people saw the benefit of it really quickly, right? Like, in our piloting, and like, we show them, hey, this is, you take this, your method of how we would normally do this, and here's how we kind of apply that. It was a lot easier for people to gravitate to that very quickly. And I think again, we've had a lot of people have some really good success with it in what we're doing. So yeah.
Yeah. How would you say that? I think a lot of firms are going to be really interested to hear about what use cases specifically you guys have been using AI visualization for, or I mean, just anything other than visualization as well. But just across the board, which use cases have really been sped up, been changed, augmented? Um, how much of it's like ongoing communication with existing clients versus trying to win new business with competitions and that type of thing?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think, there's definitely been instances where we've seen the ability to compete in different ways, like, um, not having the bandwidth maybe on a proposal, just, in the past, to say, we need to produce some really knock it out of the park, content to show a client. Um, I think it's kind of started, you start seeing a little bit level set of the playing field there, where now we're able to really produce a better product and show something early on, very early on, to get that idea across without spending so much, man time in a sense to get there. I think it allows us to compete in a field that maybe we wouldn't compete in before. A lot of the workflow we're doing now is early in the conceptual process, the SD phase, where we have models that are the design intent's there, but again, we haven't fully flushed things out. It's not fully material developed. That's been hugely beneficial to be able to do quick studies on materiality for clients, and still be able to use even in pretty schematic models to get a real feel for what the space will look like down the road. So selling that idea, I think, has been really beneficial. And we have clients that want to see it that way. I think as architects, we we can tend to see things differently, right? We can fill in gaps where others can't. So even a rough conceptual model, to us, like, we can fill in the gaps of what that's supposed to be. I think we
Client
actually,
doesn't have the
yeah,
imagination.
exactly. And I think we actually had a client tell us that. Like, we had a client literally was like, "Hey, I want to see what's actually going to look like." Like these, the white box models and stuff like that, we
White
think are
parts, yeah.
artistic sometimes. Yeah. Like, and, the client, I think, was very honest and said, I just need to see what it's going to look like. I can't visualize it. So this was a tool where, it was very great for that aspect. So we were able to then show them all of what we're trying to do in a more final looking, aspect, right? It's the caveat of, like, it's still like, we're still early, but we're able to show you kind of something that looks more polished. And that's been greatly beneficial to the teams. And so things like that, like material studies, I've seen a lot of that happening to where we're again able to just really explore spaces more with clients to see where we're, to end up with a better product in my mind. Right. And then even on the, kind of the farther end of it, where we're, looking at kind of just edits and tweaks to things. So if we render something out, we want to just slightly adapt it or change something or add something to a scene. It's makes that process much easier, saves us a lot of time in a sense, and we're able to do that. Whereas sometimes you might just say, well, we don't have time to even do that. We're just gonna have to be done with it at this point. It allows you to explore a bit more. So that's gonna, I think, somewhat lend to a trade-off. I think a lot of times you talk about AI, all you hear about is like, oh, it's efficiency. Like, it's yeah, gains efficiency. I'm like, yeah, it does, but it's also allowing us to explore more. Right. So I'm not going to say it just means that, oh, we just immediately gained like a lot of time back to our projects. It's actually, it's trade-off, right? So there's some of that. Yeah, we've probably gained a little bit, or we're able to do some things quicker, but now we're also able to explore and look at things in a more meaningful way. Right. I'm not saying it's in a wasted way. Like, oh, we just want to look at 10 options because we can look at 10 options, but we're able to explore things and take that design philosophy further than we were before, which is the reason we do with this with a lot of tools, I think. So
And what do you think that's I'm curious to know, in your opinion, how has that helped transform the way you interact with clients? I mean, and maybe this is, you're more the design technology lead, so maybe you kind of have to rely on what some of your team is saying. And maybe you can ask them after this for me
yeah,
if you haven't heard much yet. But like, I'm really curious, and I've been in trying to ask other people. Just, does that increase client satisfaction? Does that increase the ability for clients to really be able to explore and get what they want, rather than having to settle because they just didn't have the optionality to explore? And you guys were like, you can't expect us to do all these renders, but now you kind of can. Now it's like, actually, yeah, let's see what it looks like at daytime, nighttime, all these different scenarios, all these different patterns and materials that you can explore now.
yeah. I think that's definitely some of the feedback you're already getting, is the idea, that I don't always want to say it's, oh, we're able to do more now, right? Like, it was like the problem we had when we did Revit and like BIM. The promise of BIM was we're going to get better with coordination, but what we ended up doing a lot was we produced like a lot more sheets. Like with when you got in the Revit and BIM, it's like, all of a sudden now we're producing like, 10 times the amount of sheets we did for a project, because we can,
Yeah.
and because it's fairly easy to do that. It didn't mean we, made it all much more efficient. Are we delivering better buildings and products? Yeah, more than likely on that side of things. But Same thing here. It allows us to take that conversation with a client and really, I think, get deeper with that, right? And to really have that conversation be more meaningful. Like you said, instead of saying, well, we have to stop because we have to print and we have to submit and we have to give this thing in for review. It's starting to expand, I think, that design timeline more and give us more of an opportunity to really have a better product for the client at the end. And that's to me is like one of the big um things I'm excited about with all of this AI. It's you know, I went to school for architecture and I love design and I love creating, great spaces, but the thing I didn't like to do was some of the busy work and like I didn't want to do stair section details all day long. You know what I mean? That's not really what I want to do. I think that's where we're going to have with a lot of this efficiency that comes in, a lot of this automation that happens. We're actually going to be able to go back to, in my opinion, what we got into this for, which was really designing and creating a better product for our clients. And I think it's going to really allow us to do that at the end of the day is produce, really great architecture, at the end and help us do that. So
I think a lot of people have been worried and concerned that, like, wait, so does that mean AI takes away some of my most fun parts of being an architect? Like, I don't get to do that artistic piece anymore. And we're hearing from a lot of people that, kind of echoing what you were just saying, which it's kind of the opposite. Like, because it's easier to explore those artistic pieces faster, it's not so much of like a, hey, that's a nice to have time wasting portion. It's like, actually, I can explore super fast, really quickly. And I think a lot of people think that like sketching goes away, which is like not true. Like, you give your sketches to the AI.
yeah, I mean, in a sense, I think that's true. And I hear that that's a big, I think, concern from a lot of people in the industry, students coming up into, how is it affecting a creativity factor of everything. And this was very early on. And I think you can use AI in a negative way just as much as you can in a positive way, right? So if you wanted to, yeah, I mean, I could just tell AI to completely hallucinate my entire design. And I could say, hey, base a design on Frank Gehry, and I want it to look like Frank Gehry's architecture, or I want it to look like BWBR's architecture. Whatever it is, you can do those things, and then it's not your thought anymore, and you're going to end up with just AI stuff, right? AI garbage is kind
AI
of a
slop, AI slop,
yeah,
right?
it is, and I think that's just an interesting way to approach it. You can do it that way, or you can do it where you're again using your own design methodology and your way of approaching work, and it's just a partner in that process. And I think that's where it's powerful for our teams, and that's where you start seeing the positive side of it too, as you go down that road. But yeah.
The other thing that I'm really curious about is, as you were as we were talking about, working with clients and that type of thing. Is it fair to say that architects are far more capable of working in the low to mid fidelity zones when you're working on uh, your plans and your designs, and the client mostly likes living in the mid to high fidelity area, and so being able to quickly have feedback loops of high fidelity, like, does the client, do you find that they want to live there, or do they kind of span the whole thing, and you're able to kind of, have feedback loops with all of it?
Probably depends on the client, right? You got some clients that are probably, are more in that high fidelity range and others that they have their own process and time it's going to take to do it. So again, that goes back to a human aspect of our profession too, is understanding our clients, right? So you have to understand that your client operates, what drives them, what you give like again, some clients might not want to see pretty pictures all the time. They might want to just look at the floor plan. It's like you have to understand your client too. So that's
Mm,
that human element that we're not losing. We have to understand our client and what drives them, and that helps us shape the output and how we're working towards that goal, in my mind.
that's awesome. Well, I am curious as well. with that, I mean, if there's anything you can't share, obviously don't. But is there any specific project that you can think of? Once again, you're kind of above the people doing the projects. Um, are there any projects that come to mind with BWBR or anything that stands out?
Yeah, I mean, I won't use the names specifically, but we did we're one of the projects we worked for when we first were bringing Run Diffusion on was with a pretty technical client and some pretty high end spaces they were looking at. And again, this was the client that was they literally told us, you know, we can't just look like we don't understand the schematic looking images, right? So if we gave them kind of more of that, you know, I don't know, just flat color or just kind of white box design, like that wasn't working for them. And they were very honest with us and upfront about that. Like we need to see a picture. Like show me a picture so we can understand what it's really gonna look like. And even though this was early on in SD, it you know, it allowed that team to be able to show them consistent, um, you know, generations of imagery from our conceptual designs using Run Diffusion. And what they learned in there, it was a lot of learning process, right? So they learned how to prompt correctly to get similar output from multiple views. Like that was a big thing, like figuring out, like, you know, you talk about, you know, it hallucinates and stuff like that. So one of the issues I think with AI and image generation is like from one view of a space to a slightly different view, having consistency, right? And that early on, that was a big problem. Like you'd shift the view and it's completely different. Like now, if you prompt it right, you can actually have very consistent looking, you know, high level, you know, images from multiple vantage points of a project and still get the point across. So it's not perfect, but it still has that same thread of this is what we want the space to look like. And now we can apply that to multiple areas in a building over multiple buildings. It's been pretty fantastic to see that happen. And again, the client was, you know, very happy with that ability to be able to go to that output and do it quickly. So we did a lot of iterations with that one. It was multiple buildings, multiple spaces we're looking at, and we were able to really um, come to good decisions with that client over time. So
That's awesome. And yeah, so I'm how important has it been to be able to like take the wins and the learnings, like as you're learning how to prompt better, as you're learning how to keep that consistency, how have you how have you tried to disseminate that?
we're still trying to disseminate it, I think. I mean, it's again, like I said before, I think it's great when it's naturally growing in the design teams and they're already starting to kind of build their own vocabulary on how they approach some of these things. So that helps. I mean, our teams are working together in project teams. They've got the groups of people that they're working alongside. So I've had people basically come to me and say, I need access to this. I've been working with so and so who's been using it. I've seen how it's operated. I want to be able to get in there and use it too. So there's been a lot of that natural kind of progression with it, which is really good to see. You know, it's great to see that you have people coming and asking about it without me even have to tell them, right? We promote it, we'll talk about it, we'll show examples, which is great. But when you start really seeing that natural progression to these tools, because it's just,
People
um,
asking for the adoption.
yeah, exactly, because they're
Yeah,
seeing the benefit in other people using it and how it's worked on their projects. Yeah, it's inevitable, but I think they're really seeing some positive effects from it, and it just helps to, you know, naturally kind of ingrain that in there. Um, Especially with, I think, the image side of things. There's only so much we can, I don't know, standardize with that. You know, it's not really something I can say, well, here's the script for doing it every time. I think there's lessons learned from some of these things. Like, again, the ways in which we prompted, you know, the outputs we're trying to choose, like some of the simple settings things I always go over with people when I kind of bring them onto the platform, like letting them know, like, hey, if you didn't know, here's how this tool kind of works. They all generally have these settings that you have to pay attention to. There's some things just like technically that are good for people to know. But you know, it's also fun to see people, their own process and how they're kind of applying their own skill sets to use this tool, which I think is pretty incredible. So
that's cool. That's good to hear. Um, I guess aside from just generally saying like efficiency, have you seen hours saved? Like in terms of like the feedback loops, I guess you could say that that time gets filled with more feedback loops. So it's
It
like,
can, yeah.
yeah, it saves time, but I guess maybe what you could say is it expanded it gave you more time in the areas that made the client get closer to what they needed and wanted, which in the end gave you guys a big leg up on being able to deliver as a company for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if we only take the approach of, how much time it saves us, that's where you're gonna just it's gonna be a spiral. It's gonna be a downward spiral. Like, yes, it can save us time in areas. There's some areas where it's absolutely gonna save you time, but like I said, I think it's affording us, to be able to take our creativity and again, I think, really engage with the client in new, meaningful ways that we weren't able to before, just didn't have time to maybe do, in the past. But yeah, to me, that's where it's at. There's going to be some savings, but there's also going to be some. We just looked at. I mean, I can and go into any of our projects right now and say, well, we just generated like, you know, 20 different material options for this. We probably wouldn't have done that before. Maybe we would have done 3 because that's what we had time for. And there could be an argument around that. I'm sure, people are gonna say, "Well, did we really need to do 20 iterations, or do we really need to do that?" Maybe if it forces you to stay, more limited, that's a good thing. I think that's all things we're gonna have to work out too, and figure out, like, how much is too much for just because I can, should I? Hopefully you're still generating images based on, something we've learned about the client or about the project, that this is why we're doing that. And we're also being reserved where else it's don't generate stuff for the sake of generating, but hopefully we're using it, to be impactful with our clients.
Yeah. Well, and at the end of the day, like everyone just needs to use the right tool for the right job. And if new tools become available that help you do those jobs better, like I would say it's kind of incumbent upon you in your profession to be adopting the best tools to deliver the most value for your clients. And like, because there's this YouTuber, I wish I remembered his name. He has like over 500,000 subscribers. He was a Disney animator,
Oh, okay.
and he was basically and this he was commenting on, AI like a year ago, a video, and he was saying that it was it reminded him a lot of when CGI came out.
Oh, okay.
And how when CGI came out, everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, all the animators are gonna lose their jobs, and the computer's just gonna do it all." And he said, but instead what happened was, yes, you had less animators per production, but you had 5 times the amount of productions that were now possible. And so it just distributed the amount of animators across a bunch of different productions. So the work changes,
Mm.
but the time doesn't just get saved and then everyone just works 10 hours a week. Like
Yeah, no.
that's not how
I
this
think I
works.
I think there's a bell curve to everything, like,
Yeah.
and I think the same thing with even, like, the life cycle of a project, right? People say, "Well, we're just gonna, like, make it so efficient that we're never gonna make any money again." I said, "I don't think that's true." I think there's a bell, like, yes, there's gonna be some efficiency gains in this, but there's still a point, like, there's still an amount of time that every project is going to have to take, and that varies depending on your client, the building type, whatever it might be. Like, you can't just completely shrink away the whole process of design because it's a complex process. It's something, you understand. It's not just a simple process. It's understanding programs. It's understanding the client's needs. It's understanding the area you're in when you're designing. Architecture is a complex, process and complex problem to solve for people. So, yeah, AI is going to help. It's going to help, and it's going to make some things efficient. Probably, hopefully, the things that were a pain for us in the past. I mean, again, I remember doing Photoshop renderings where I had layered. I exported all these layers and I controlled this. And it was like, to me, I was like, that was awesome. Like, oh my gosh, I'm able to do this cool stuff with, like, looking at material differences in PowerPoint, or not Power, in Photoshop. Like, this is like, Photoshop is a great tool. Like, that was awesome. And now that, AI makes that look like just absolute, child's play, right? To me, I mean, I was just thinking to myself, man, I would have loved to have this back in school,
Right.
I was never like, and even in design school, I'm sure a lot of people are like, I wasn't the artist type. Like I couldn't like, I could hand sketch stuff to get my ideas across, but I was never like producing the crazy, beautiful hand sketches or renderings. That wasn't me. So I gravitated towards that technology front pretty quick for that. And that's just where we live with these things now. But, yeah, I just, I think there's always a period of time that there's only so much efficiency gain you can get on something. And that's just going to be the case. And it will change. I always go back to the image of, I have this old image of like a bunch of, used to be a bunch of men sitting in a drafting table room, right? So when it was all paper, all these guys with ties on, with their ties over their shoulders, and they're all drafting individual sheets. And then you say, well, whenever CAD came around, you think about it, that room shrunk down, right? So it doesn't mean those people were gone; they're doing other things, but it did change the way that that workflow happened. And it's the same thing, now I feel like it's AI is going to have that kind of same effect, for us down the road.
Well, it's interesting. I was trying to do research. I've been doing research for a while now, but like I'm really trying to better understand architects and the architect career. And in my research, someone had said, like, you know, what's like the core of an architect's career? And one way that they tried to sum it up was by saying that they're problem solvers,
Hmm.
which really resonated with me, primarily coming from building software, is like the technology changes all of the time, like
Yeah.
constantly. Like even before AI, new open source packages were coming out every year, every 6 months. And the open source community, because software developers, they live off of all of the open source tools. Like that's our toolkit, is just endless open source tools.
Yeah.
And you're constantly having to relearn and readapt, but it's like you're just solving problems with the right tools for the right job. And I think, I don't know, do you think that that's a helpful way to bridge, I don't know, maybe people who are scared or thinking about this in a fear-based way, that like at the end of the day, you need to solve problems and build beautiful, enriching things that people find value in.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I'm an optimist. Well, at least I'm an optimist when I talk about AI in terms of like my career, because I think that's an easier bubble to live in. If we want to talk about AI on the like global economical scale, that might be a different conversation. But for our profession, I'm fairly optimistic about. It actually makes me excited about architecture again, to be honest. Like I've kind of fully transitioned to technology for architecture, right? But I think seeing some of this new stuff that actually made me like, oh wow, I think it'd be fun to work on a project again, which is crazy to me. I haven't worked directly on a project in a while in that sense, but there's some of these things that actually starts bringing me back to that point. I had a conversation with one of our principals about it, and it was that same. Some of that came up was like, well, what happens whenever this stuff just automates everybody's job out of our office? And he said, or he says, well, now the other company down the road can basically do the same thing we can do, and in the same shorter amount of time or same amount of time. I said, I looked at him too, and I said, what's the reason we have a high percentage of repeat clients? That was my question. I said, it's not because our drawings are, you know, 10 times better than the next person. I said, it's not necessarily because our fee's cheaper. I said, we all play in the same kind of field in some sense for that. I said, what's the reason? And I asked him to answer that for me. And he says, well, I guess it's our relationships. I said, yeah. I said, a lot of our work is not always because they're coming to us because we're the cheapest or because, we're the fastest. I said, it's because they have a relationship with us too. And they had a good experience, right? That project was a good experience. I want to work with them again because it was such a good experience. And I think that's what we can keep delivering, in our profession for what we're doing. And that goes for any really business or how you're dealing with clientele, right? If the experience is good, and you had a good outcome from it, it's going to make me want to go back to that person again. And I think that's still a very human element we have in this career, in our profession, that's going to remain, right? So if there is some level setting because of AI, and now we're able to compete with the giant firm, at the same,
Anything, it's democratizing it a little bit.
yeah, yeah, I really, I honestly think, I really think if people had to worry, I would say the mega firms have more to worry about than we do. And
They lose a little bit of their
uh,
monopoly.
yeah, well, and they were able to, maybe compete in some areas because they're able to crank things out because they have very specialized areas. I think it's like the mid-sized firms like us and others. I think we're in a good place where this is really going to, the efficiency gain will be a lot higher, I feel like, in there, as opposed to others, in that sense. But yeah, I mean, to me, it's still a relational factor with our clients. So I've had the same thing with like software vendors, right? So I've had people that have come at me like really aggressively, and tried to sidestep my knowledge and say, "Oh, well, this is what you should be looking at." I said, "I don't talk to them anymore." I said, because there's other people out there that I can reach out to. So yeah, there's still a human element, I feel like, that is always going to remain in that, and that's why you get work, and that's why you get repeat work, and that's why people want to work with you. So that's not going to be lost, I don't feel like.
Yeah,
Hopefully we
I
can see
just
that.
well, I just think everyone's gonna wanna talk to people. They're gonna wanna they're gonna have ultimate trust in people, even if those people happen to be in an Iron Man suit now.
Yeah, well, COVID and the whole metaverse, I think, made it very clear to us that human connection was still highly valued, right? I remember whenever it was COVID, and I love working virtually and being in a remote position now. Thank you, COVID, for that. But whenever like the metaverse came out, and they're like, well, everyone's gonna just virtual's gonna be the way we do everything. And then when they started to come out with like virtual conferences, that was like the first like we're gonna, yeah, virtual conferences. I mean, I was immediately like, no, thank you. I was
Right.
like, and it fell so flat and died immediately. Why? Because you forget the reason people go to conferences is not just for the content. It's also that human connections for the networking, like being in person. There's still huge value to that, right? So I don't see clients going to like an AI bot in the future just to get their job done. Like, oh, here's the architecture AI bot. I can have it do for me. I don't see that being the end goal. Yes, it's going to have a part to play, but we're still going to have a part to play in it, I think, as we're going on.
Yeah, and I just think that, like, you know, in just a couple of years from now, I think it's gonna be pretty widespread that, like, if you're not adopting AI in some way, it would be like you saying, "I don't use a computer to get my work done." It's like, you don't have to define who you are by the tools you end up using that end up being better tools. And that's what, like, they're just tools, and at the end of the day, you are the conductor, you are the kind of you are the human brain that is able to synthesize, problem solve, use the right tool for the right job, and interact with the client. Like, you're gonna remain so critical, so crucial.
Yeah, I believe that, and I know there's varying opinions on that, but to me, I still feel like that's going to exist. Is it going to have disruption? Yeah, for sure. Like
Yeah,
it's going to disrupt things. It's going to
and I'm
change.
not claiming that that doesn't mean no one loses their jobs in any way. It just means that
Right.
disruption happens, and you might just lose your job to people that are learning the tools. Like, you're not necessarily losing it to the AI bots that are now talking to the people rather than you. It's just
It's
they're
the
talking to
people
the people
using
that
the bots. Yeah.
adopted it
Yeah.
faster, just like you had to adopt Revit. It's like it
Right.
just becomes the new specification for the role.
Well, it's funny you make that, draw that kind of, comparison there with Revit, because like even nowadays there's still, you'd be surprised, but there's still people that don't use it. There's still people who are going to do projects in CAD. And they might be in a niche area. They might have some niche clients that, it works perfectly fine for what they're doing. I'm not saying it didn't wipe everyone out. Like, no one, there's still people using AutoCAD and delivering projects that way, even in our world, right? So And even within our, even within our company, I don't not everyone's a Revit user. Like, in our case, like, not everyone, and there's some people I'm like, "Don't touch it. I don't need you to touch it." It's like your knowledge base and how you apply your other skills to the project are great, but they're not necessarily the ones operating that tool, right? Same thing with AI, I think, too, and this has been kind of an interesting conversation because I think everyone's like, "Well, everyone has to use it." I asked the question like, "Well, what if there's people that don't wanna use it?" I said, "What does that mean? Like, what does that mean for their job? How are they interacting? Are they able to, work alongside someone that's using it and helping to make it more efficient?" So, there's a lot of questions about that happening, and this is a harder one in that question because of how just invasive it is, right? Right. It's not just a tool. Like, Revit was a tool. It just sits out here. Yes, it connects to other things, but it's a tool very specific for what it does and what it uses. AI is everywhere. Like, you almost can't avoid it nowadays in just your normal life half the time, right? It's in every app you touch, it's in every piece of software, there's some sort of AI component, whether you even know it or not. Um, and that's funny too, because we've also had the conversation of what if a client, I've seen this and heard sometimes that clients are like in the contract now, they might say, well, I don't want AI used at all. I'm like, that's going to be complicated. And it's kind of, I parallel that to back whenever we started with building information modeling, there was this thing called LOD, which is level of development. And, all of a sudden you'd have clients writing in there, "Well, I need a level 400 building." And we're always like, wait a minute. It's like, do you know what that means? So it still means there has to be a conversation there, I think, to understand, like, what do you mean by no AI? Like, okay, do you not want it touching a public cloud? Okay, well, we can accommodate that, but do you not want it to be in meeting notes? Do you not, like, it's everywhere.
It's
It's
kind
going
of
to be everywhere.
becoming a part
Yeah.
of just the underlying way that most products are gonna start to have just generic features that are in there. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then it goes beyond that to the point of now with this, what can we do with it beyond just, using it in our process? Like, we can use it to start building our own tools, like, and customizing the way we want to do it. It's like opening a door to other areas now that weren't even really maybe even explored before now.
So yeah, just being optimistic about the opportunities and give you it doesn't have to be an end all be all. You have to become obsessed with every aspect of it, but like you just have to be aware of where does it add value? Where does it not yet? And adopt it where it where it pulls you into the value. I love that you were saying that. Like when you're getting adoption and it's getting pulled in rather than you having to enforce it,
Hmm.
it means that it's truly adding value, and that's great to hear. Okay, well, Andrew, man, is there anything else I should have asked you that I didn't?
I don't know. I think we covered a lot. I mean, like I said, this will probably be old news in another couple days or week.
Right.
Everything changes. You know what I
Well,
mean?
we'll
It's
have
just,
to have you back on then.
yeah, for sure. It's a conversation. I used to be able to think, oh yeah, I know what the next 5-10 years is going to look like in the industry. Nowadays, I'm like, you don't know. You don't know. It's ever changing, and stuff I talked about last year is different than now. So yeah, I think the conversation is always going to continue. So it'll be interesting to see where we are in another year, even based on this conversation.
Okay, well, that's probably when we'll have you back on now.
Sounds great. Yeah.
Okay, well, Andrew, man, it's been awesome chatting with you, and I just really appreciate your insights on all this. I think that a lot of people are just either they're scared or they just don't know where to start. They don't know how to approach it, and I think hearing, you know, voices in the industry really kind of speak to their experience is just going to add a ton of value to people. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thanks so much, man.